As a born and raised New Yorker, I have a deep, unshakable love for bagels, an irrational hatred for slow walkers, and a special talent for pretending I don't see or hear crazy people screaming at an empty seat on the subway. New York is in my blood. It shaped me, toughened me, made me who I am, and I will always hold a special place in my heart for it. But I would never move back to New York City because here's the thing. New York is like an ex you keep defending even though deep down you know it was a toxic relationship. Sure, it had its moment, the energy, the excitement, the feeling that you were in the center of the universe, but at what cost? Long hours at the office, sky-high rents, constantly feeling lost and alone as if you aren't doing enough. Plus, a constant battle of just trying to exist in a city that demands everything from you and gives very little in return. I spent years convincing myself that was just part of the deal and that New York had its special charm. But then I left, and now that it's been 4.5 years since I left New York, let's talk about all the reasons why I would never ever live there again. For context, I wasn't just some wide-eyed transplant who moved there for a fresh start like 99% of people you'll meet in New York. In fact, without fail, every time I would meet someone new, they would ask me where I was from, and I would answer New York City, and they would say, no, but like originally, where are you from? And I would say, yeah, I was raised in New York City, Washington Heights. This was so foreign to people that I cannot tell you the countless number of people I met who told me that I was the first person they knew who was actually raised in New York City. Yes, I was raised in it, built my entire career in it. I knew every trick of the subway. I knew some of the best dive bars and local digs. New York was in my blood. And for years, I thought leaving was impossible. Like somehow the world would just end if I ever left New York City because I assumed everywhere else was just so dull. But then I left. That was 4.5 years ago. I packed up my life and I moved to Israel, walking away from everything I had ever known. Not because I had to, but because in the end I knew that New York City didn't in fact have everything to offer and I wanted something more. More than the endless grind, more than the exhaustion, more than the never-ending pit of loneliness and surface-level friendships who are all networking and trying to get a leg up in life, more than the illusion of success that New York dangles in front of you like a carrot on a string that you always chasing just out of reach. You know, just one more late night at the office away from that promotion that you want so badly to make just a few more bucks so you can upgrade your apartment and maybe this time you can actually have a sliver of some indirect sunlight come through your window during 3 waking hours of the day, which you end up missing most of the days of the week because you're usually at the office during all waking sunlight hours anyway. But you see, now I look back and realize that not only was leaving the right decision, it was the best decision I ever made because the city I once called home, it isn't home anymore. It has unraveled, and every new headline, every conversation with family still there, every story I hear only reinforces what I already know. I will never move back. But let's get into the real nitty-gritty about why exactly. First off, New York sells you a dream. Hard work pays off. Hustle now, reap the rewards later. At first, the city lulls you into a false sense that you are thriving. The fast pace, the high stakes, the sense that in New York City, you're really making it. But let me tell you about my first job at a law school. I worked as in-house counsel for a commercial real estate investment company on Wall Street. Every morning, I'd wake up, throw on a suit, and proudly march into the subway feeling like I was part of something big. But when I stepped onto Wall Street, passing the New York Stock Exchange as my heels click-clack against the cobblestone streets of FIDI, I genuinely believed, deep in my bones, I had made it. Except that I hadn't. I was completely deluded because in reality, I was making less than 6 figures while sitting on a mountain of $150,000 in student debt. My glamorous big city lifestyle was really just a 1-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side, but I didn't even get the bedroom. That went to my sister. But don't worry because I put up a wardrobe in the living room as a makeshift wall to create a 2nd bedroom. Our shared kitchen was barely big enough to turn around in, and our bathroom was even smaller and I had to walk through my sister's room to get there. And every night as we tried to fall asleep, we'd hear the homeless man on the corner screaming about aliens or something. Full-blown conspiracy theories shouted out into the night like an impromptu late-night talk show that we never subscribed to. My sister and I would exchange glances and occasionally crack some jokes about it, but then whenever we left our apartment, we would quietly just avoid eye contact with the crazy homeless man as we left our building. But it doesn't end there. No, every night when I got off the subway, I'd clutch my keys between my fingers in that classic ready position that most women know, just in case. I'd power walk to my building, hyper aware of my surroundings, praying no one was following me. And the commute itself, a nightmare. Upper East Side to FIDE every single day was a test of patience. Crowded trains, delays, that one guy taking up 3 seats, manspreading as if he owns the MTA. But I told myself it's all worth it because I was living the dream. I truly thought I had arrived. But looking back, I was just another exhausted New Yorker drowning in debt, running on fumes, and barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. But then I deluded myself further after a couple of years in that cramped Upper East Side apartment when I finally got a better, higher paying job in New York City. A real step up, I told myself, the kind of job that made me feel like I was finally breaking out of the struggle phase and into something better. But it came with longer hours, of course, more than 12 hours a day, every day, locked in an office, breathing recycled air under fluorescent lights. Don't get me wrong, I really like this job, okay? And I told myself, what's the price of success? At least now I was making real money. But not really, because my take home at the end of the month was actually basically the same. Because in New York City, as soon as you get a pay increase, it is almost a rule of nature that you have to upgrade your apartment, because if you can just get a little more space or a little more sunlight, you're going to take it. I was done with shoebox living. No more living room as a second bedroom. No more maneuvering through my sister's room when I needed to use the bathroom in the middle of the night because the only bathroom in the apartment was through her bedroom. No more shared kitchen the size of a closet, because if I was going to be working this much, I at least deserved to come home to a place that felt comfortable, I told myself. A place that felt like I was actually making progress in life. This is, of course, what every New Yorker tells themselves. So I upgraded. A slightly bigger apartment, a slightly better location, finally a space that felt like a reflection of all of my hard work. But at the end of the day, my entire pay raise was almost entirely swallowed up by that increased rent. Sure, my new paycheck had a few extra zeros, but my lifestyle had scaled right along with it. And with that, my savings were still almost non-existent. The only difference was that now I had a nicer apartment that I was barely ever in because I was almost never home to enjoy it, because where did I really live? At the office. Early mornings, late nights, I was at the office. The apartment was cozy, but I mostly saw it in passing on my way out the door at sunrise, or when I collapsed onto my bed just before going to sleep each evening, too tired to even register that I was paying a premium for a place that felt more like a glorified storage unit than a home. And still, despite all of this, I told myself, this is how it's supposed to be. This is what success looks like. But as the years passed, the grind that once excited me started to wear me down. The long hours weren't a phase, they were permanent. The pressure wasn't temporary, it was the culture. 7:30 a.m. to about 10 or 11 p.m. many days of the week. For years, I spent going to or from or at the office. And sure, the money was good, but what was I even spending it on? Rent for an apartment I barely lived in because I was always at work. Work clothes I never really wanted, but just bought because they were the only thing I ever wore anymore. A vacation once every 4 months that felt more like a desperate attempt for a breath of air than any real substantive break. New York takes everything you have, your energy, your money, your youth, and in return it gives you what? A resume, a successful career, a sense of status. Now don't get me wrong, I want to be perfectly clear. New York is the ultimate launch pad. If you're young and hungry and willing to give up sleep, personal space, and a semblance of work-life balance, it can be worth it for a handful of years, just like you might sacrifice those things in the early years of a startup. If you're in your 20s, you can live there with boundless energy, ready to prove yourself, to make connections, to put in the insane hours that would be considered inhumane anywhere else. At that stage in life, you don't mind the grind as much. You don't have kids to get home to, you don't expect to leave the office at a reasonable hour, and you're surrounded by people just like you, all chasing something, all too busy to notice how exhausting it actually is. You tell yourself that all these sacrifices, the tiny apartment, the 14-hour days, the complete lack of free time, are just temporary, just a means to an end. And for a while, it works. You're getting ahead, you're making a name for yourself, you feel like you're on a fast track to something bigger. But here is the catch. If you don't catch yourself at some point, the sacrifices never stop. Because no matter how much you level up, New York always demands more. More hours, more stress, more money for an apartment that you still don't have time to enjoy. And before you know it, you're in your 30s, still sprinting, still trading all your time for a career that in the end doesn't actually love you back. That's when the cracks start to show. At some point, you start to wonder, is this all that there is? I used to tell people that everyone should live in New York City for a handful of years in their 20s to build character, a can-do attitude, and good work ethic. And I still think that's true. But I also also think that it is not sustainable to stay and live in New York City long term if you want any type of quality of life or work-life balance or sense of community. That's the trade-off. And after a while, it just gets to a point where you just realize it's no longer worth the energy, the grinding, the cost, the stress. It's no longer worth it. But beyond this toxic hustle culture is the second reason I would never move back to New York City. And that's the deep, dark pit of loneliness that most people feel, which they often self-medicate with alcohol. I know what you're thinking. There are so many people in New York City and there is always something going on. Isn't it so easy to meet friends? But the truth is pretty surprising because that's not exactly how it shakes out. You see, the culture isn't big on making deep, meaningful relationships where you spend quality time going on hikes or learning deep things about your friends and building lifelong bonds. You're not sitting in bed braiding hair of your girl pals. No, instead the culture is big on working hard and playing harder. It's not an episode of Friends. People who are young work 60 hours a week, and then when they aren't working, they're basically just drinking, because that's what you do in New York. Work hard, drink harder. There's always a happy hour, always a reason to grab just one drink after work, and socializing often just looks like meeting up with a group of people on a Friday or a Saturday night to go to some bar or lounge or blow off some steam after a grueling week. Even when I was on my own on a work night for several years, I was in the habit of getting home on an average weeknight and pouring myself a glass of wine. Some nights half a bottle, some nights the whole thing. I thought it was just normal to have a glass of wine with dinner. In truth, that's not normal, or else it really shouldn't be. The truth is, it was a toxic coping mechanism to take the edge off the exhaustion, to make the never-ending cycle feel a little more bearable. I thought that was normal until I left that culture. And now I barely drink at all, not because I forced myself to quit, but because I just don't need to, because I actually have things in my life that fulfill me. My family, my work, my hobbies, my time, my kid, things I never had in New York because there was no space for anything except work and escapism. But this is a symptom of a much larger issue, the loneliness epidemic in the greatest city in the world. Although New York is packed with people, making real lasting connections is nearly impossible. Friendships are transactional, built around convenience, built around bars, built around shared misery. You make friends through work, through drinking, through dating apps. But deep friendships, the kind that last, are rare because New York isn't built for permanence. It's a revolving door. Most people in New York are just temporary transplants. People move there chasing a dream, burn out, and leave over and over and over again. Every time I got close to someone, they'd move away. And the friendship, it would fade like all the others before it. Eventually, I stopped even trying. Because what's even the point of making friends when you know the relationship is only temporary? Throw yourself deeper into work, because at least work won't leave you. You convince yourself that networking is the same as having a social life. You pretend that you don't actually crave more, but you do. And one day you wake up and realize you're just plain old exhausted. And that's when I knew I had to get out. But the third and perhaps most important reason that I would never move back to New York City is because of the sheer cost. Because the cost of living in New York City has become otherworldly levels of exorbitant. Housing costs have soared, with average rental prices in 2025 in New York City being $3,870 a month for a one-bedroom apartment and $5,274 a month for a two-bedroom. And don't even get me started on buying an apartment, because the median sale price for only a two-bedroom apartment in Manhattan is about $2.14 million US. And don't get me started on the cost of food in New York City, because the average monthly cost for a family of four is approximately between $1,200 and $2,500 per month, which includes both groceries and dining out. But it's important to note that dining out is a significant part of New York City's culture, because apartments are really small in New York City, and as a result, people don't really have an ability to host gatherings. Because of that, many residents prefer to socialize in the city's diverse array of restaurants and cafes. Also, because people work so many hours a day, they're often so fatigued when they get home that they don't have the energy to prepare dinner or any food for the next day. And as a result, it is also very common for New Yorkers to go out to eat lunch in the middle of their workday instead of packing a lunch to take to work. In fact, it's become so much the culture that even when people do host a gathering, they will often order in from a restaurant for their guests. A six-figure salary, once considered a hallmark of success, now barely covers the essentials in this exorbitantly priced city. But the real tragedy in the sky-high cost of New York City is that you are now paying more than ever for a city that is slowly becoming worse and worse. When I walked away from New York, I thought I was leaving behind a difficult but magical city. But the New York of today, it's basically unrecognizable. The pandemic changed everything everything. Stores have closed, either from lockdowns, from looting during protests, or from sheer financial ruin. Those once bustling streets, they're now lined with vacant storefronts and ghosts of businesses that never recovered. And crime, it's gone through the roof. Policies designed to be progressive have made it nearly impossible to hold criminals accountable. For example, the migrant crisis also took a particularly large toll on the erosion of law and order in the city. This has led to a palpable shift in the city's atmosphere. Everyday activities like shopping or commuting now come with an undercurrent of unease. You walk into a pharmacy now and everything, shampoo, deodorant, baby formula, it's all locked up behind glass cases, requiring assistance for even the simplest of purchases. Like, you want to buy deodorant, you gotta get someone to unlock that case for you. Shoplifting is rampant, and the store owners can't even defend their own business without facing legal consequences, because theft has become so common that stores have no choice but to allow it. And public safety, forget about it, because don't even get me started on the subway, which is the lifeblood of the city, but now feels like low-key a war zone. People getting shoved onto the track, stabbings, assaults, mentally unstable individuals roaming freely because the system that should be helping them is broken. And it's not like the subway didn't have crazy people and safety concerns before. Believe me, it did. But now it's gone to a heightened level of crazy. But honestly, every single time I've visited my family in New York City in the past 4.5 years, I felt ready to leave well before my trip was actually over. It always feels like the New York City I left just no longer exists. The first time I came to visit my family, I was very excited to see New York City again, and I planned a month-long trip, and in the end, it felt far too long. Then the next time, I shortened my next trip to 3 weeks, and it also felt far too long. To be honest, the next time I have to go to the city to visit my family, I'll probably just keep the trip to like 1 week, because after that, I'm usually just ready to leave. While the city still holds a place in my heart, the prospect of returning has become increasingly unimaginable for me. Because New York City might be the city that never sleeps, but all that no sleeping will ultimately bring you after a while is sheer exhaustion. If you enjoyed this video, you should subscribe to my channel down below, and you should watch this next video over here, which YouTube really thinks you're gonna enjoy.